Now, considering, I mean, my colleague did ask you this question initially, but I don't quite think you gave an answer to it. Considering the flaws that you noticed, I'm just wondering, are you satisfied with the fact that INEC is calling for supplementary elections rather than for an outright fresh poll?
Like I said, this would be a case here that we'll have to sit down as Situation Room and come up with a position at some point this morning. But indeed, if there were areas where there were inconclusive elections, of course, that's INEC's responsibility to ensure that votes are properly conducted in those areas. And if in any instance they have to cancel, then that's what needs to be done. If in the areas where even voting has taken place and there is sufficient evidence that the votes that took place there was flawed, then INEC would also have a responsibility to conduct fresh elections in those areas. It's really, again, the responsibility of political parties. Political parties have to take themselves seriously. They have to put agents in every polling unit. The agents have to come up with evidence, and with the evidence that they have, the process says that if they cannot get INEC to come to the same conclusion as them, that the votes were flawed and cancel the elections, then you also have a different stage, which is the stage of the litigation process. But for us to keep going back to litigation at every election and allow the tribunals, with all their flaws and imperfections, to determine votes that have been cast by people is not what elections is about. INEC's success should be that there are few litigation on elections that it conducts, and where every election or virtually every election in this country has to go to a litigation for resolution, it raises strong questions about election management body's competence.
You know, yesterday was scheduled for a rerun in some localities, especially Demili North and and even around Obosi. Well, considering the fact that majority of people in that locality are Christians, and not just nominal Christians, but practicing Christians who should be in church. Do you think it was a misnomer for INEC to have rescheduled the election for Sunday?
Well, basically for INEC to reschedule the election, the stakeholders that would join it in making the decision are the political parties. I think that there should have been a discussion between INEC and the political parties to decide on what to do. I don't know if this was done. One or two of the parties had indicated that they didn't want the elections on the Sunday, and given that that party felt that that particular locality was its stronghold, I think that it then means that it has a major voice, and INEC really should have had proper consultation before scheduling a date. But we did have observers in Idemili North, and a lot of our observers came back with reports, and even as at 2:30 in the afternoon, which is late into the day, there were no election officials to be found in several polling units. So if that election did go on, and the reports we get is that in several polling units there were no election officials to begin accreditation, then it must be a question really what was done yesterday on the Sunday that INEC had scheduled this. But our observers came back with reports indicating that there was very few polling units that conducted elections on Sunday.
Well, I think one wonders how INEC came into all of this. Perhaps maybe they were stampeded. You tell us what you think into all of this. And if you say that perhaps they had consultation with political parties, some would say no, that the electorate, not every member of the electorate is a member of political parties. So they should be given adequate preparations and information as to when a rerun will take place in such a locality. And knowing full well that if this were to happen in another part of the country where majority are Muslims and you decide to put elections during the Jumat service, it's a waste of resources. And that's what happened when even the members of staff of INEC were not seen in such locality when it was time for the electorate to cast their votes on a Sunday?
Well, I'm not going to go into the the religious sides of this. The point, I think, is really that parties are major stakeholders in elections, and were they consulted? It didn't seem so. And for me, I think that's really critical. The parties are the ones that pass on the information. In the localities that we're talking about, there was really a restriction of movements. First of all, if the announcement was made on the Saturday evening, the question then becomes, how did that information reach the grassroots? How did it reach those that were supposed to vote? Was there some communication between INEC and voters? I don't know. I don't know how it could be adequate to sensitize voters to come out to vote on the Sunday. Two, if the parties that are critical in the conduct of elections were not part of a consultation that arrived at fixing the date, which is less than a few hours after it was supposed to have held, then it becomes a question whether the parties that have responsibility for mobilizing their supporters convey the information as well. And if that party or parties, the parties had said that they were not participating, then it would seem unlikely that they did, that they went out to mobilize anybody to come out and vote on the Sunday. So it would seem quite clear that there was very little information out there about a follow-up election on the next day, which was yesterday. In that circumstance, should we not then understand why even election officials, INEC officials, didn't show up in several polling units in Idemili North on Sunday?
Well, Clement Wanko, would like to thank you so very much for your time, for finding time to be with us in our Abuja studios to look at a review of the Anambra elections. Maybe we may have to get back to you specifically with some members of the Situation Room in Anambra State. Well, many thanks again. Time for us to go over to our news studios here in Lagos. Joker Roger is standing by to give us the first shot of the news.
Thank you so much, Sulaiman. Well, here are the headlines we have for you at this hour. There's been a dramatic twist in the conclusion of the Anambra State governorship elections after the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, declared the results of the polls as inconclusive. The INEC Chief Returning Officer in Anambra, Professor James Epoke, explained that the decision is owing to the fact that the number of cancelled votes are more than the difference between the number of votes polled by the winner and the runner-up. Supplementary polls are to hold where elections were cancelled. Earlier, Professor Epoke had given the figure of 113,000 as the total number of votes cancelled. In the results earlier announced by INEC at the end of the collation, the APGA candidate, Mr. Willie Obiano, had scored 174,710 votes, while Mr. Tony Nwoye of the PDP polled 94,356 votes, and the All Progressives Congress candidate, the Dr. Chris Ngige, had 92,356 votes. Well, INEC has done what has said its own, but women are angry over what they say is the Commission's show of insincerity in the conduct of the governorship elections. The women, numbering over 100, staged a peaceful demonstration against the exercise in Orca yesterday evening. On arrival at the entrance of the INEC office, no official attended to the protesting women. In other news now, over 11 months after he was abducted by suspected kidnappers in Rimi town of Katsina State, a 63-year-old French national has regained freedom following a massive manhunt of his abductors by the police. Mr. Francois Colombe escaped from his captors on Saturday at Dan Magaji village in Zaria, Kaduna State, and found his way to the nearest police station. The Kaduna State Police Commissioner, Mr. Odufemi Adinaiki, officially presented Mr. Colombe to journalists at the police headquarters in Kaduna before handing him over to French embassy officials. On the international scene, officials in Egypt say that at least 24 people have been killed and 28 injured as a train crashed into a minibus and other vehicles in an area